Parental permission. I walked along one day, indulging in a beloved pastime, considering meanings of words on a deeper, more philosophical strata. That day's rumination. Considering the difference between guilt versus regret. The more I contemplated, the more I convinced myself that sensations of guilt found their basis in the present, where those of regret were based in the past, being a consequence of perpetual guilt. Simply put, I may feel guilty now, but by tomorrow, I'll feel regret. This question drove me still deeper. Why couldn't I let the guilt go, instead dragging it along with me into another day? Why did I still feel upset? Knowing my tendency to beat myself up for being imperfect, I typically feel guilty when I think I've done something wrong, so the regret is directly related to my inability to allow myself to err, to give myself permission to be human, to fuck up essentially. Why couldn't I forgive myself? Should I always forgive myself? Don't I need to boot up my ass every now and again? Shit, now I'm confused. Must guilt and regret be viewed as bad emotions? Aren't they there to teach me something like all emotions? Let's go a bit deeper. How do we know the permission we bestow upon ourselves is authentic? That pesky little prick called guilt is a good clue. For example, when I tell myself I can eat an entire pizza as a treat, then I feel guilty afterwards, the permission was not unconditional. There's a lot to learn about ourselves right there. What are those quiet conditions that I couldn't hear until the guilt hit me? What am I telling myself about eating a whole pizza that inspires such guilty feelings? For me, it's the terror of regaining weight. Experiencing the old unhealthy urge to overexercise and undereat to rebalance the scales, or simply putting something in my body that I know will slow it down and create discomfort. In such cases as these, compromise is best. 2 pieces of pizza over the next few days is not only cost effective, but also quiets those tiny asshole voices. There's no sense in hating them. They're there to look out for me in their own way. Even if sometimes they are misguided and interlaced with conditioned falsehoods, they're mine, and I choose to love them instead of fight them. In my experience, once they realize I'm not willing to fight, they too calm down, and I feel completely peaceful in myself. Its own kind of self-care, I suppose, learning to forgive myself for both being imperfect and also for beating myself up for being imperfect. Permission to be me, all of me. This previous paragraph was actually intended for protecting the pearls, but I took it out. It seemed to clash with the rest of the theme I was going for. This was something completely its own. I caught myself. I tripped over the idea that guilt was a bad thing, something to be avoided at all costs. Then recognized the false logic. And yes, that whiplash of mindfulness can be a bit of a headache. What I'm insinuating is there is another side of permission, one that I'd argue goes underappreciated, one that inspired me to ask myself the question, what kind of permission would I give myself if I was a next-level kick-ass parent? One who perfectly displays the delicate balance between encouragement and acceptance, loves unconditionally, but also knows when to challenge. One who knows when it's best to coach their offspring and build their independence, and when to manage their child because they're doing something that won't ultimately serve them well. Don't good parents allow their children to feel guilty and regretful from time to time because they know it will teach them valuable life lessons? My regional manager also helped me see this boundary. They know my habit of coaching and enabling autonomy, so they said to me one day, When your kid is about to put their finger in a light socket, you don't have a coaching conversation with them. You tell them to get their finger out of the bloody light socket. That was honestly the first time I realized that what makes an exceptional leader, or indeed a parent, is knowing which is which. When to take the soft or hard approach. Balance is required lest we create a rebellious little shit or a complete wimp. Looping back to granting ourselves permission and administering that higher level of self-care, what are we if not parents to ourselves? Our higher selves, coaching and managing the little shit that is our tiny human egos. I caught myself pondering this newfound theory in my journal the next day without realizing it. The other side of permission. Why might we feel guilt? Yet it's not about self-punishment or beating ourselves with the naughty stick labeled, I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done that. Two things. 1. Sunday morning, I slept in until 8 a.m., effectively missing my tarot reflection time. And 2, Sunday night, I had an all-out binge, giving into the insatiable hunger I feel every night before I go to sleep, which then mysteriously disappears by morning. At first I thought, chance to practice permission without guilt. Great. Effectively, permission equals good. Guilt equals bad. And by so doing, I completely contradicted what I was fucking writing in the snake pit. In that emotional masterpiece, I asserted that there are no bad or good emotions. Yet here are these ingrained false beliefs deep within my subconscious at play in real time. How did I work this out? Why, elementary, my dear Watson, but not really. After much back and forth in my analytical mind, which doesn't feel quite so grating as I'm learning to see it as a mental exercise and how I work through this shit, it struck me that I felt disappointed in missing my normal 5 a.m. tarot and coffee session. I love that ritual. I also felt especially shitty Sunday night when I couldn't sleep because I'd overslept the previous night. That wasn't the only factor affecting my Z's, however, since the massive amount of sugar I permitted myself to eat just before bed made my heart pound, which always makes drifting off difficult. I arose the next morning feeling really fucking grumpy and without my normal zeal for coffee and a workout. Overall, there was plenty of feedback, not failure, to reflect on. I felt guilty and disappointed in my brain. I felt agitated and not rested in my body. Altogether now, I felt confused by all the information. Isn't it possible then, like a good parent, I know what's best for my mental and physical health? That instead of being a self-punisher, I'm actually developing into a self-parent. Hilariously, I reached this conclusion while thinking of the parents who permit their kids to smoke 10 cigarettes at once or get rip-roaring drunk. In both scenarios, the kid is likely to puke their brains out and consequently abstain from such activities, at least for a while. Like the time Mom came to pick me up when I was having a panic attack from smoking too much pot. She never said a word, yelled at me, or punished me. She just let me eat my entire cake and watch TV with extreme tunnel vision, high as I please. She understood that the terror I experienced taught me better than she ever could. I can't say that I never smoked pot again, but I sure as shit never smoked and tried to drive again, which is an improvement. If I hadn't noticed the guilt and disappointment, I'd never have worked this out or learned more about myself. Because of my past proclivity for self-punishment, I'm slow to trust myself when I hear, I should get up early, or I shouldn't eat 3 pieces of cheesecake before bed, mistaking the punisher for a wise parent who is only looking out for what is best for me. So no, it's not as simple as I'd like it to be, but life never is. Wisdom is the ability to choose what's best in any given moment, regardless of conditioning or my past. Wisdom is trusting that I have my own back, that all the parts of me that are on the same team, and they all have a vested interest in keeping me both alive and well. If nothing else, it reminded me to practice what I preach. Oh, the embarrassment of discovering I assert there are no bad emotions in one blog post, while working on another, observing myself calling guilt a prick. Very humbling. But as always, I remain grateful. What a lesson. A lesson in true permission, both sides of it, comprehensive. Permission to feel unconditional love for myself, for appreciating guilt as well as pleasure. Each are great teachers in their own right. As if all of this wasn't mind-obliterating enough, one more shift was still to come, one that inspired philosophical contemplation about the kind of parent, or in this case, dictator, I was to my budding and fragile human consciousness. Here's the recipe. 1 part thought-provoking Facebook quote. Quote, at your best, you still won't be good enough for the wrong person. At your worst, you'll still be good enough for the right person. 2, a million parts bullshit from ongoing issues encapsulated in a particular life situation. I'll leave it at that. 3, 2 parts deeper insight into my inner dark side and how shadow casting has partly landed me in said situation, something I also allude to in my podcast about compassion. 4, a dash of yet another Facebook quote. Quote, sometimes it's okay if the only thing you did today was breathe. And abracadabra, one superb epiphany materializes. The way I feel in this situation, the sensations and utter lack of self-worth I'm experiencing, yet blaming on someone else, is precisely how I used to treat myself. Back in the days when every moment needed to be accounted for, when I constantly demanded so much of myself, when I had to prove that every effort added value. Back when I couldn't relax and needed to be medicated for anxiety, yet I couldn't figure out why. When I never allowed myself to just be myself, unconditionally and with complete love and acceptance. Like a flash of transcendental self-actualizing lightning. I saw it all, and years of confusing self-torture made perfect sense. I'm still only about 65% of the way there. That might be an overestimation. There are still times I yell. I tell myself I've wasted a whole heap of time because I didn't achieve X, Y, or Z. Sometimes I feel guilty. What constitutes that 65% is this. The fact that I'm now aware of these thoughts, emotions, and behavior, and can laugh at myself instead of turning that guilt into constant regret, writing myself off. I know what being a good parent looks and feels like now, even if the only child I'll ever have is my own gorgeously flawed, perfectly imperfect, tiny human ego self.